The morning sun cast long shadows across Chicago O'Hare Airport as travelers hurried through the busy terminals. Among them was David Thompson, a well-dressed man in his early 40s pulling a sleek black suitcase behind him. His crisp navy suit and polished leather shoes spoke of success, but his calm demeanor suggested someone comfortable in his own skin rather than trying to impress anyone. David had been traveling for business for over 15 years, and airports had become like second homes to him. He moved through security with practiced ease, nodding politely to the TSA agents and fellow travelers. Today's destination was Atlanta, where he had an important presentation scheduled for the next morning. It was the kind of meeting that could change everything for his company, and he had spent weeks preparing every detail. At gate B12, David found a quiet corner and opened his laptop. While waiting for the boarding announcement, he reviewed his presentation slides one more time. His company had been working on this project for months, and tomorrow's meeting with potential investors could secure the funding they needed to expand nationwide. The numbers looked good, the market research was solid, and David felt confident about their chances. Now boarding Flight 447 to Atlanta, first-class passengers and our premium members, the gate agent announced over the intercom. David closed his laptop, gathered his belongings, and joined the short line of first-class passengers. He had earned these upgrades through years of frequent travel, and while he never took the luxury for granted, he certainly appreciated the extra comfort during long flights. The flight attendant at the gate, a middle-aged woman named Linda, greeted each passenger with a warm smile. "Good morning, sir. Have a wonderful flight," she said as she scanned David's boarding pass. Her genuine warmth was exactly the kind of customer service that made traveling pleasant. Walking down the jetway, David felt the familiar mix of excitement and nervousness that came before important business trips. This wasn't just about money or success. His company employed 37 people, and their families depended on the work they did. Every major decision, every presentation, every new contract affected real lives and real futures. He found his seat, 2A, a window seat in first class. As he settled in and stored his carry-on bag in the overhead compartment, David noticed the cabin crew preparing for departure. The head flight attendant was making announcements and checking passenger lists. But it was another crew member who caught his attention, not because of anything she did, but because of something she didn't do. Beverly Morrison had been a flight attendant for 15 years. She knew the job inside and out, from safety procedures to customer service standards. But lately, she had been feeling frustrated with work, dealing with demanding passengers and long hours that kept her away from her family. That frustration had begun to show in subtle ways that even she didn't fully recognize. When Beverly first noticed David in seat 2A, something flickered in her mind. She had seen thousands of passengers over the years, and she prided herself on being professional with everyone. But recently, she had started making quick judgments about people based on appearances, assuming things about their backgrounds, or how they could afford certain seats. It wasn't something she was proud of, but stress and fatigue had worn down some of her usual courtesy. She watched as David organized his papers and pulled out a tablet. Her eyes lingered on his expensive watch and well-tailored suit. In her tired mind, questions began forming. How could he afford first class? Was he some kind of entertainer or athlete? The assumptions came quickly, uninvited, and unfortunately, they influenced how she approached her job. When David pressed the call button to ask for a glass of water before takeoff, Beverly took longer than usual to respond. She was busy with other tasks, she told herself. But in reality, she had seen the call light and chosen to finish organizing the snack cart first. When she finally approached his seat, her smile was less warm than the one she had given to other passengers. "Yes?" she asked, her tone neutral but lacking the friendly enthusiasm that was supposed to be part of her job. "Could I please have a glass of water when you have a moment?" David asked politely. He had noticed the slight difference in her tone compared to how she spoke to other passengers, but he chose to give her the benefit of the doubt. Everyone had bad days. "I'll bring it when I can," Beverly replied, already turning away before he could thank her. She moved on to other passengers, chatting pleasantly with an elderly woman in seat 1B and laughing at a joke from the businessman in 2C. David watched these interactions from the corner of his eye. Years of business travel had made him observant, and he could sense when something was off. But he also knew that jumping to conclusions never helped anyone. Maybe she was having a difficult day. Maybe there was some personal stress affecting her work. He decided to remain patient and courteous, hoping that kindness might improve the situation. As more passengers boarded the plane, Beverly continued her pre-flight duties. She helped people find overhead compartment space, answered questions about the flight, and distributed blankets and pillows. With most passengers, she was professional and helpful. But when she interacted with David, there was a noticeable shift in her energy. She avoided eye contact, kept conversations brief, and seemed to always have something urgent to attend to elsewhere. Other passengers began to notice too. The woman in seat 1B, Helen Martinez, had been watching the interactions around her. As a retired school principal, she had developed an eye for subtle forms of discrimination. She saw how Beverly's demeanor changed when serving David compared to other passengers. Helen had witnessed this kind of behavior before, and it always disappointed her. A young man in seat 3A, college student Jake Wilson, was also paying attention. He had grown up in a diverse community and had been taught to recognize unfair treatment when he saw it. Jake watched as Beverly brought water to several passengers but seemed to forget about David's request entirely. 20 minutes had passed, and David hadn't received the water he had politely asked for. When David finally pressed the call button again, Beverly approached with visible annoyance. "What do you need now?" she asked, her professional mask slipping slightly. "I'm sorry to bother you again, but I had requested a glass of water earlier," David said, maintaining his polite tone despite the obvious attitude he was receiving. Beverly let out a small sigh, as if this simple request was a major inconvenience. "I'll get it," she said curtly, walking away without any apology for the delay or acknowledgement that she had forgotten his original request. As the plane prepared for takeoff, David reflected on the interactions. He had experienced this kind of treatment before, and while it never stopped being disappointing, he had learned not to let it ruin his day. Tomorrow's presentation was too important to let anything distract him from his goals. He opened his tablet and began reviewing his notes once more, choosing to focus on what he could control rather than dwelling on what he couldn't. The plane taxied down the runway, and soon they were airborne, climbing into the cloudy Chicago sky. David looked out the window at the city below, thinking about the people he was leaving behind and the opportunities waiting in Atlanta. He had no idea that this flight would become one of the most significant journeys of his life, or that Beverly's behavior was about to escalate in ways that would change everything for both of them. The flight had been in the air for about an hour when the meal service began. David was deep in concentration, reviewing financial projections on his tablet when he heard the familiar sound of the beverage cart making its way down the aisle. The presentation tomorrow morning was crucial, and he wanted every number, every chart, and every talking point to be perfect in his mind. Beverly pushed the meal cart through first class, starting with the passengers in row 1. Her interactions with other travelers continued to be warm and professional. She laughed with the elderly woman in 1B about turbulence, complimented the businessman in 2C on his tie, and even helped a nervous first-time flyer feel more comfortable about the slight bumps they had experienced. But as she approached row 2, her demeanor shifted. David looked up from his tablet and offered a genuine smile. Despite the earlier awkwardness, he believed in treating everyone with respect and kindness. That was how his parents had raised him, and those values had served him well throughout his career. "Good afternoon," David said pleasantly. "Could I please have the chicken parmesan with a coffee? Black coffee if possible." Beverly nodded without making eye contact. "I'll see what we have," she replied, though the menu clearly listed chicken parmesan as one of the available options, and she had just served it to 3 other passengers. She moved on to serve the passengers behind him first, taking their orders with considerably more patience and attention. David noticed but continued working on his presentation, determined not to let the situation affect his focus. He had learned long ago that some battles weren't worth fighting, especially when he had bigger goals to achieve. 20 minutes later, Beverly returned to his row. She carried a tray with what appeared to be the chicken parmesan and a cup of coffee. The meal looked appetizing, and David was grateful for the service despite the earlier friction. He had been traveling since early morning and hadn't eaten anything substantial. "Here you go," Beverly said, balancing the tray in one hand while reaching across to place it on David's tray table. What happened next would be debated and analyzed for days to come. As Beverly leaned over to set down the tray, her grip seemed to loosen. The cup of hot coffee tilted, then spilled directly onto David's chest and lap. The dark liquid soaked through his crisp white shirt and splattered across his navy suit jacket. The pasta sauce from the chicken parmesan followed, creating bright red stains that spread across the expensive fabric. The coffee was hot enough to make David gasp and push back in his seat. The liquid seeped through his shirt to his skin underneath, creating an uncomfortable burning sensation. His important presentation materials, which had been spread across the tray table, were now covered in coffee and sauce. "Oh," Beverly said, her voice flat and lacking any real concern. There must have been some turbulence. David looked around the cabin. Other passengers were sitting normally, their drinks stable in their hands. There had been no turbulence. The plane was flying smoothly as it had been for the past hour. The woman in 1B was holding a full glass of wine that hadn't moved an inch. The businessman in 2C was typing on his laptop, his coffee cup sitting perfectly still beside him. "I don't think it was turbulence," David said calmly, though his shirt was now soaked and stained. "The plane seems very steady," Beverly shrugged, grabbing a few small napkins from her cart. She handed them to David with the same energy someone might use to swat away a fly. "These things happen," she said. "You should be more careful when someone's serving you." The comment hung in the air like a challenge. David stared at her, processing what she had just said. She was suggesting that he was somehow responsible for her spilling hot coffee and food all over him. The absurdity of the statement was matched only by its audacity. Helen Martinez, the retired principal in seat 1B, had witnessed the entire incident. She had been watching Beverly's interactions with David throughout the flight, and what she just saw confirmed her suspicions. There had been no turbulence, no sudden movement, no accident. Beverly had deliberately spilled that food and drink. "Excuse me," Helen said, turning around in her seat to face Beverly. "I saw what happened, and there was definitely no turbulence. The plane has been perfectly smooth." Beverly's face flushed slightly. "Ma'am, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I think I know when there's turbulence." Jake Wilson, the college student in 3A, had also been watching. He had his phone out, supposedly playing a game, but he had actually been recording parts of the flight for a social media story about his first time flying first class. His camera had captured the moment Beverly spilled the coffee and food, along with her dismissive response afterward. "I recorded that," Jake said quietly to the passenger next to him, but loud enough for others to hear. "That was definitely not an accident." David remained calm despite the uncomfortable wetness of his clothes and the burning sensation where the hot coffee had made contact with his skin. He had dealt with difficult situations throughout his career, and losing his temper now wouldn't solve anything. But he also couldn't let this behavior go unchecked. "I'd like to speak with the flight supervisor," David said clearly and politely. "This situation needs to be addressed properly." Beverly's attitude shifted from dismissive to defensive. "Sir, I already apologized for the accident. These things happen during flights. There's really nothing else to discuss." "You didn't actually apologize," Helen Martinez interjected from her seat, "and you blamed him for what you did." Other passengers began to take notice of the commotion. The businessman in 2C looked up from his laptop. A family with 2 young children in row 4 turned around to see what was happening. Word was spreading through the cabin that something significant had occurred. Beverly realized that the situation was escalating beyond her control. Her plan had been simple: create a minor inconvenience for a passenger she had made unfair assumptions about, then minimize the incident and move on with her day. She hadn't expected witnesses to speak up or for anyone to demand accountability. "Look," Beverly said, lowering her voice and trying to sound reasonable, "I can get you some club soda to help with the stains, and the airline can reimburse you for dry cleaning. That's the standard procedure for these kinds of accidents." "This wasn't an accident," David said firmly but without raising his voice. "And I still want to speak with the flight supervisor." Beverly's jaw tightened. She was used to being in control of situations in her cabin, and having passengers challenge her authority was not something she handled well. "Sir, I don't appreciate your tone. I've been trying to help you, and you're being very difficult." Jake Wilson looked down at his phone, watching the replay of the incident he had recorded. The video clearly showed Beverly's deliberate movements, the lack of any turbulence, and her dismissive attitude afterward. He realized he was holding evidence that could change everything. Helen Martinez was getting increasingly upset by Beverly's behavior. As an educator, she had spent decades teaching young people about fairness, respect, and taking responsibility for their actions. Watching an adult behave so unprofessionally was deeply disturbing to her. "Young lady," Helen said to Beverly, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to correcting inappropriate behavior. "I have been watching your interactions with this gentleman throughout the flight, and what I just witnessed was deliberate and unacceptable. You owe him a real apology and proper assistance." Beverly felt trapped. The situation was spiraling, and she could see other passengers paying attention to the confrontation. Her supervisor would definitely hear about this now, and she would have to explain why multiple passengers were complaining about her conduct. David sat quietly, coffee and sauce still dripping from his clothes, waiting for Beverly to make the right choice. He knew that how she responded in the next few moments would determine whether this incident became a teachable moment or something much more serious. The plane continued its smooth flight toward Atlanta, but the atmosphere in first class had changed completely. What started as a routine meal service had become a defining moment that would test everyone's character and have consequences that none of them could have imagined. The tension in the first-class cabin was thick enough to cut with a knife. Beverly stood frozen beside her cart, realizing that what she had intended as a small act of petty discrimination had turned into a public confrontation with multiple witnesses. David remained seated, his expensive suit ruined, waiting patiently for her response while coffee continued to drip from his clothes onto the airplane floor. "I want to speak with the flight supervisor," David repeated, his voice calm but firm. "This needs to be handled properly." Beverly's face showed a mixture of panic and defiance. She had been hoping the situation would blow over quickly, that she could offer some napkins and move on with her service. But the passengers around her weren't letting that happen, and she was beginning to understand that this incident might have serious consequences for her career. "Sir, there's no need to escalate this," Beverly said, trying to sound reasonable while her voice betrayed her nervousness. "Like I said, I can help you with club soda for the stains, and we'll take care of the dry cleaning. These kinds of accidents happen all the time during flights." Helen Martinez turned fully around in her seat, her eyes flashing with the kind of authority that had commanded respect in countless classrooms over her 30-year career as an educator. "Stop calling it an accident," Helen said sharply. "I watched you deliberately spill that coffee and food on this gentleman. There was no turbulence, no sudden movement, nothing that would cause an actual accident. What you did was intentional, and your attitude afterward has been completely inappropriate." Jake Wilson was still processing what he had captured on his phone. The video clearly showed Beverly's actions, and he knew it could go viral within hours if he posted it. But something told him to wait, to see how the situation developed before making any decisions about sharing it publicly. Beverly shot an angry glance at Helen. "Ma'am, I don't know what you think you saw, but I've been doing this job for 15 years. I know the difference between an accident and something intentional. I would never deliberately spill anything on a passenger. Then why did you blame him for it?" Helen countered. "Why did you tell him he should have been more careful when someone was serving him? If it was truly an accident caused by turbulence, why would his carefulness matter?" The businessman in 2C, Robert Chen, had been listening to the entire exchange while pretending to work on his laptop. As a corporate lawyer, he recognized the legal implications of what he was witnessing. Beverly's actions could be considered assault, and the airline could face serious liability issues. "Excuse me," Robert said, closing his laptop and looking directly at Beverly. "I'm an attorney, and I've been observing this situation. Based on what I've seen and heard, this goes beyond a simple service issue. This gentleman has the right to speak with a supervisor, and frankly, you should be encouraging that rather than trying to minimize what happened." Beverly felt the walls closing in around her. First, it was just one passenger complaining. Then witnesses spoke up, and now a lawyer was getting involved. She could feel other singers in first class watching the drama unfold, and she knew word would spread throughout the plane. "Fine," Beverly said through gritted teeth. "I'll get the supervisor. But this is being blown way out of proportion." She turned to walk toward the front of the plane, but David's voice stopped her. "Before you go," David said politely, "I'd like your name and employee number, please." Beverly's heart sank. She realized that this passenger wasn't going to let the matter drop quietly. He was documenting everything, preparing to file a formal complaint. Her mind raced through the potential consequences. Disciplinary action, suspension, maybe even termination. Beverly Morrison, employee number 4471, she said reluctantly, knowing that refusing to provide the information would only make things worse. David pulled out his phone and typed the information into his notes app. His movements were calm and deliberate, showing no anger or frustration despite the circumstances. His professionalism in the face of such treatment impressed the other passengers and made Beverly's behavior look even worse by comparison. As Beverly walked toward the cockpit to find Captain Rodriguez, Jake Wilson made a decision. He opened his messaging app and sent the video to his roommate with a message. "You're not going to believe what just happened on my flight. Should I post this?" His roommate's response came back immediately. "Dude, that's crazy." "Yeah, post it. People need to see this." But Jake hesitated. He looked at David, who was using napkins to clean coffee off his tablet screen, still maintaining his composure despite everything that had happened. Something about the man's dignity and restraint made Jake want to give him the chance to handle the situation his way first. Helen Martinez had pulled out a small notebook and was writing down everything she had witnessed. As a former educator, she understood the importance of documenting incidents thoroughly. She had dealt with discrimination cases before, and she knew that detailed. Contemporaneous notes could make all the difference. "Excuse me," Helen said to David. "I'm Helen Martinez, and I want you to know that I saw everything that happened. I'd be happy to provide a witness statement if you need one." David looked up from cleaning his tablet, gratitude evident in his eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Martinez. I really appreciate that." "I'm David Thompson." Robert Chen also spoke up. "I'm Robert Chen, and I witnessed the entire incident as well. I'll be happy to provide a statement too. What that flight attendant did was completely unacceptable." Jake Wilson cleared his throat. "I'm Jake, and I actually recorded part of what happened on my phone. I was making a story about flying first class for the first time, and I caught the whole thing on video." David's eyebrows raised slightly. "You recorded it?" "Yeah, I got the spill and her reaction afterward. It's pretty clear that there was no turbulence and that she did it on purpose." David nodded thoughtfully. "Would you mind not posting it anywhere just yet? I'd like to handle this through proper channels first." Jake was impressed by David's measured approach. "Of course, man. It's your call." Meanwhile, Beverly had reached the front of the plane and was speaking with Captain Rodriguez in hushed, urgent tones. She was trying to downplay the incident, describing it as a minor spill that had been blown out of proportion by difficult passengers. Captain Rodriguez listened patiently, but his expression grew more serious as Beverly's story progressed. He had been flying for 22 years and had dealt with countless passenger complaints. He could usually tell the difference between legitimate issues and exaggerated grievances, and something about Beverly's defensive tone raised red flags. "So you're telling me that multiple passengers are making false accusations against you?" Captain Rodriguez asked. "They're just ganging up on me," Beverly said. "You know how passengers can be. One person complains and suddenly everyone wants to get involved." Captain Rodriguez had worked with Beverly for several years and had never had serious issues with her performance. But he had noticed some changes in her attitude lately. Small things that individually didn't warrant action, but together painted a concerning picture. "I'll come back and speak with the passenger," Captain Rodriguez said. "But Beverly, if what they're saying is true, this is a very serious matter." Beverly's stomach dropped. She could hear the doubt in his voice, the shift from automatic support to cautious investigation. "Captain, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I would never intentionally harm a passenger." "I hope that's true," Captain Rodriguez replied. "But I need to see for myself." As they walked back toward first class, Beverly's mind raced through possible explanations and excuses. She had been so focused on her petty prejudices that she hadn't considered how her actions might appear to others or what the consequences might be for her career. The other passengers in first class could see them approaching. David sat quietly, his ruined shirt and jacket a visible reminder of what had transpired. Helen Martinez had her notebook ready, Robert Chen had his business card in hand, and Jake Wilson was still holding his phone with the incriminating video. What none of them knew yet was that this incident would become much bigger than a simple complaint to an airline supervisor. David Thompson wasn't just any passenger, and when his true identity was revealed, the ramifications would extend far beyond this single flight. Captain Rodriguez approached David's seat with Beverly trailing reluctantly behind him. The next few minutes would determine whether this situation could be resolved quietly, or whether it would explode into something much more significant. Captain Rodriguez approached David's seat with the practiced calm of someone who had dealt with thousands of passenger complaints over his 22-year career. He could immediately see the extent of the damage. David's white dress shirt was stained dark brown with coffee. His navy suit jacket was splattered with red pasta sauce, and papers on his tray table were soggy and stained. "Good afternoon, sir. I'm Captain Rodriguez. I understand there was an incident with your meal service?" David stood up respectfully, extending his hand for a handshake despite his stained clothes. "Good afternoon, Captain. Yes, there was an incident, but I want to emphasize that this isn't about the spill itself. It's about what happened afterward and the pattern of service I've experienced throughout this flight." Captain Rodriguez shook David's hand, noting his calm demeanor and professional manner of speaking. In his experience, passengers who were simply looking to cause trouble or get free upgrades usually came across as demanding or emotional. David seemed genuinely concerned but measured in his response. "Can you walk me through what happened?" Captain Rodriguez asked. "Certainly. Your flight attendant, Ms. Morrison, spilled coffee and food on me during meal service. When I mentioned that there hadn't been any turbulence, she told me that these things happen and that I should have been more careful when someone was serving me. She seemed to blame me for her spilling food on me." Helen Martinez turned around in her seat. "Captain, I witnessed the entire incident. There was absolutely no turbulence when she spilled that food and drink. The plane has been perfectly smooth, and her attitude afterward was completely unprofessional." Robert Chen looked up from his laptop. "Captain, I'm an attorney and I also witnessed what happened. The flight attendant's behavior has been problematic throughout the flight, not just during this incident." Jake Wilson hesitantly raised his hand. "Captain, I actually recorded part of what happened on my phone. I was making a story about flying first class and I accidentally captured the whole thing." Captain Rodriguez looked at Beverly, whose face had gone pale. Multiple witnesses, including an attorney and someone with video evidence, painted a very different picture from what she had told him just minutes earlier. "Ms. Morrison, these passengers are telling a different story from what you described to me," Captain Rodriguez said carefully. "Can you explain the discrepancy?" Beverly felt trapped. She could feel the eyes of everyone in first class watching her, waiting for her response. Her career was hanging in the balance, and she knew that whatever she said next could determine her future with the airline. "Captain, I think these passengers are misunderstanding what happened," Beverly said, her voice shaking slightly. "It was turbulence, and I was just trying to explain that accidents happen during flights. I wasn't blaming anyone." Helen Martinez shook her head firmly. "That's not what happened, and that's not what you said. You told him he should have been more careful. There was no turbulence, and you know it." Captain Rodriguez had heard enough. The multiple witness accounts, combined with his own observations of Beverly's recent attitude changes, convinced him that this was a serious situation that required immediate attention. "Mr. Thompson, I sincerely apologize for this incident. The airline will absolutely cover your dry cleaning costs, and I'd like to offer you a full refund for your ticket as well as travel vouchers for future flights." David nodded appreciatively. "I appreciate that, Captain. But I have a more immediate concern. I have an important business presentation tomorrow morning, and my luggage won't arrive until later tonight. These were the only business clothes I brought in my carry-on." "We can help you find appropriate clothing once we land," Captain Rodriguez assured him. "The airline has partnerships with several clothing stores in Atlanta." As they spoke, David's phone began buzzing with notifications. He glanced down and saw multiple missed calls from his assistant, Patricia. Something urgent was happening. "Captain, would you excuse me for just a moment? I need to return this call." David answered his phone, and Patricia's excited voice came through loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "David, you need to check social media right now. Someone posted a video from your flight and it's going viral. The whole internet is talking about what happened to you." David looked confused. He glanced at Jake Wilson, who looked equally puzzled. "I didn't post anything, and this young man said he wouldn't share the video." Jake quickly checked his social media accounts. "I didn't post it." "I kept my word." But then Jake remembered something. He had sent the video to his roommate before promising David he wouldn't post it. His heart sank as he realized what must have happened. "Oh no," Jake said, checking his roommate's social media accounts. "My roommate posted it, I sent it to him before I promised you I wouldn't share it. I'm so sorry. David's phone continued buzzing with notifications. Patricia was still on the line, her voice filled with excitement and concern. David, this is huge. The video has been shared thousands of times in the past hour. People are calling it discrimination, and they're demanding answers from the airline. The hashtag Justice for David is already trending. Captain Rodriguez overheard parts of the conversation, and his expression grew more serious. A viral social media incident involving his airline could have massive repercussions for everyone involved. Mr. Thompson, did your assistant say this was going viral online? Captain Rodriguez asked. David nodded, still processing the information. Apparently someone posted the video of what happened, and it's spreading rapidly on social media. Beverly felt like the world was crashing down around her. A viral video meant that millions of people would see her actions, judge her behavior, and potentially recognize her face. Her personal life, her career, everything could be destroyed. Captain, Beverly said desperately. It wasn't that bad. It was just a small spill. This is being blown out of proportion. Helen Martinez had been following the conversation with growing interest. As a retired educator, she understood the power of social media to shine light on injustice, but she also knew how quickly situations could spiral out of control. Captain, if I may, Helen said, this incident represents something much larger than a spilled drink. I've been watching the interactions throughout this flight, and there was a clear pattern of discrimination in how this gentleman was treated compared to other passengers. Patricia's voice came through David's phone again. David, the media is trying to identify you. They want to know who you are and get your side of the story. What should I tell them? David looked around at the passengers who had supported him, at Captain Rodriguez, who was trying to handle the situation professionally, and at Beverly, whose career was hanging in the balance. He realized that this moment would define not just his own response to discrimination, but potentially influence how similar situations were handled in the future. Patricia, don't release any information about my identity yet. Let me handle this properly first. Captain Rodriguez was beginning to understand that this situation was much more significant than a typical passenger complaint. A viral video meant media attention, corporate involvement, and potentially serious consequences for the airline's reputation. Mr. Thompson, given the circumstances, I think it would be best if we could discuss this matter further once we land. The airline's customer service manager will meet us at the gate. David agreed, but he knew that once they landed, everything would change. The viral video meant that this incident was no longer just between him, Beverly, and the airline. It had become a public matter that would require careful handling. As the plane began its descent into Atlanta, none of them could have predicted just how dramatically this incident would impact their lives. David Thompson was about to reveal an identity that would transform this from a viral video about poor customer service into a case study about discrimination, accountability, and the power of social media in the modern world. The Atlanta skyline came into view through the airplane windows, but everyone in first class was focused on the drama unfolding inside the cabin rather than the destination approaching. Outside, the plane touched down at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport as the drama in first class reached a crescendo. David's phone had been buzzing continuously during the descent, with calls from media outlets, business associates, and friends who had seen the viral video. The hashtag Justice for David was trending nationwide, with millions of people sharing their own stories of discrimination and calling for accountability. As passengers began gathering their belongings, Captain Rodriguez made an announcement over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we've arrived in Atlanta. For those passengers involved in the earlier incident, please remain in your seats for a few additional minutes while we handle this matter appropriately. Beverly sat in the flight attendant jump seat, her face pale and her hands shaking. She had been checking social media on her phone and was horrified by what she saw. The video clearly showed her deliberate actions, and the comments were brutal. Thousands of people were calling for her to be fired. Some had already identified her by name, and a few had even found her personal social media accounts. Helen Martinez gathered her belongings but remained in her seat as requested. As a retired educator, she had dealt with many difficult situations involving discrimination and unfair treatment. She was proud of herself for speaking up, but she also felt sad that such incidents still occurred in 2025. Jake Wilson was struggling with guilt over his roommate posting the video without permission. He watched David, impressed by the man's continued composure and dignity despite everything that had happened. Jake had learned a valuable lesson about the power and responsibility that came with social media. Robert Chen was taking notes on his laptop, documenting the incident from a legal perspective. As an attorney, he recognized that this case would likely have significant implications for workplace discrimination and corporate accountability policies. As they waited, David's assistant Patricia called with an update that would change everything. "David, the media has figured out who you are. Your identity is about to go public whether we want it to or not." Channel 7 News just called asking for a comment from the CEO of Thompson & Associates. Captain Rodriguez, who had been standing nearby, overheard the conversation. His eyes widened as the pieces fell into place. Thompson & Associates was one of the most prominent diversity and inclusion consulting firms in the Southeast. They worked with major corporations, government agencies, and educational institutions to create more equitable workplaces and communities. "Mr. Thompson," Captain Rodriguez said quietly, "are you the David Thompson who runs Thompson & Associates?" David nodded, knowing that there was no point in hiding his identity any longer. "Yes, I am. We're a diversity and inclusion consulting firm. We work with companies to address exactly these kinds of issues." The irony was not lost on anyone in the cabin. A discrimination expert had been discriminated against on an airplane, and the entire incident had been caught on video and shared with millions of people. Beverly overheard the conversation and felt her last hope disappear. She had discriminated against one of the most prominent civil rights advocates in the region. Her actions hadn't just been wrong. They were professionally devastating for the airline and personally catastrophic for her career. As they prepared to disembark, David made a decision that surprised everyone. "Captain Rodriguez, I want to make something clear. While I cannot excuse Ms. Morrison's behavior, I don't want this incident to destroy her life. What happened here represents a teachable moment for all of us." Beverly looked up with surprise and confusion. She had expected anger, demands for punishment, maybe even legal action. The last thing she had anticipated was compassion. David continued, "Ms. Morrison, what you did was wrong. Your behavior was discriminatory, unprofessional, and hurtful, but I believe that people can learn and grow from their mistakes if they're willing to acknowledge what they did and commit to doing better." Helen Martinez nodded approvingly. Even after being mistreated, David was choosing to respond with wisdom rather than vengeance. "However," David added, "there must be consequences. Actions have results, and the airline needs to take this matter seriously to prevent future incidents." Captain Rodriguez nodded gravely. "Mr. Thompson, I assure you that this incident will be thoroughly investigated, and appropriate action will be taken." As they finally left the plane, David was met by a crowd of airport officials, airline executives, and media representatives. The customer service manager, Linda Williams, approached with a team of corporate representatives. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Linda Williams, the regional customer service manager. On behalf of the airline, I want to offer our sincerest apologies for what happened today. This behavior does not represent our values or standards." David shook her hand professionally. "Ms. Williams, I appreciate the apology. But what matters most is what the airline does next to prevent this from happening to other passengers." Over the following days, the incident continued to dominate news cycles and social media discussions. The airline faced intense scrutiny, with customers threatening boycotts and investors expressing concern about the company's diversity and inclusion practices. Beverly Morrison was immediately suspended pending a full investigation. Within a week, she was terminated from her position. The viral video had made her unemployable in the airline industry, and she struggled to find work in any customer-facing role. Her actions had consequences that extended far beyond that single flight. However, true to his word, David Thompson did not pursue punitive legal action against Beverly personally. Instead, he worked with the airline to develop a comprehensive diversity and inclusion training program for all employees. The airline also established a passenger advocacy system and donated $500,000 to civil rights organizations. Jake Wilson's roommate eventually deleted the original video post, but by then it had been shared millions of times across various platforms. Jake learned to be more careful about what he shared online and eventually became an advocate for responsible social media use. Helen Martinez was interviewed by several news outlets about her decision to speak up as a witness. Her courage inspired other people to intervene when they witnessed discrimination, and she became a volunteer trainer for bystander intervention programs. Robert Chen used his legal expertise to help the airline develop better policies for handling discrimination, complaints, and ensuring that similar incidents would be addressed more effectively in the future. David's presentation the next morning went exceptionally well, partly because the investors had seen news coverage of his dignified handling of the discrimination incident. His company secured the funding they needed and expanded their services to include airline industry consulting. The incident became a case study taught in business schools, diversity training programs, and social media ethics courses. It demonstrated how quickly individual actions could have widespread consequences in the digital age, but also how those same tools could be used to promote accountability and positive change. 6 months later, David received a handwritten letter from Beverly Morrison. In it, she apologized sincerely for her actions and described how the incident had forced her to confront her own prejudices and biases. She had enrolled in diversity training courses and was volunteering with organizations that fought discrimination. She thanked David for choosing education over revenge and asked if there was any way she could help with his company's mission. David responded to her letter, acknowledging her apology and her efforts to grow from the experience. He didn't offer her a job, but he did provide her with resources for continued learning and personal development. The incident on Flight 447 became more than just a viral video or a news story. It became a reminder that discrimination still existed in everyday interactions, that bystanders had the power to make a difference, and that how people responded to injustice could either perpetuate division or promote understanding and growth. David Thompson continued his work in diversity and inclusion, using his experience on that flight as a powerful example in his presentations and training sessions. He often told audiences that real change happened not just through policies and procedures, but through individual choices to treat each other with dignity and respect. The legacy of that flight lived on in improved airline policies, better training programs, and countless conversations about discrimination, privilege, and the responsibility that everyone shared to create a more equitable society. What started as one woman's poor choices had ultimately contributed to positive changes that would benefit countless future travelers.